Bonjour, Musko Nudin, Ikwe, Indishnikat, Mikanakwa Ja Anishinaabe, CP Singh Dunji. And what I just said there was also introducing myself in my native way. So thank you for that beautiful introduction and for also inviting me to be part of this training today. Before I even introduce myself, I should acknowledge and speak with humility today that, you know, I do incorporate some of the Ojibwe language, and it is, I think, a lifelong process to learn and be part of that healing language. So that's where I definitely incorporate where I can into my talks and presentations, that healing element of connecting to our language, and to also acknowledge the humility of being not considered an elder in my community, but being invited to speak on such issues. So I want to acknowledge that humility for those who are older than me and who have traveled along and have much more knowledge to be speaking on such issues. And I have an image there that's something that I incorporate into trauma healing work for natives that I drew. And right now it doesn't have any color to it. So towards the end, you'll be able to see that there are certain stages that we go through, including our adult and elderly stages, where we get those gifts and we get to have all of that color be part of who we are as a person. So Miigwech, and that is my family. I'm from Belcourt, as I was introduced, and that's my hometown reservation in the Turtle Mountains. And I'm presenting here from my clinic, where we're part of the first females to have a behavioral health clinic on tribal land. So we're really proud of what we're doing here in the Turtle Mountains. I want to, before we get started about talking about the issue of loneliness, which is the main reason that I was invited here today, is to look at the work that's been done by researchers in the field of psychology and identity. And I think it's really complex to throw a word like loneliness on an Indigenous population because of the complexity of how individuals even identify and where they're at in their journey. And this work, anytime that I talk, whether people are aware of their own levels of cultural identity or not, I think that it's really important to acknowledge where I'm at and what my perspective brings to the table. So when we're thinking about our elders and our tribal populations, there's over 500 tribes. So each tribe could have a different view of what's considered isolation or loneliness or connection. And so up at the top, identified as traditional as somebody, a tribal member who speaks their language fluently, lives their ways, is fully immersed within all of the gifts that they've been given of their native culture. And then directly below that, you can see is individuals who are assimilated, who have been brought up in the westernized society, and they do not know of another way, or they do not feel like they fit into another way, that this was the way that they were raised and what feels comfortable for them and where they feel accepted. And then on the opposite side of where you can see I'm located in the bicultural is a transitional person who is kind of taking from a native person who is able to go back and forth with the traditional and assimilated ways of life, but kind of not doing so very successfully, really struggling and kind of picking up on parts of those that where it's a little more difficult to feel that acceptance and follow their norms and their patterns. And then we have on my side where I say I feel like I'm bicultural because I've been raised a lot with assimilated manners and ways, and then introduced to a lot of my traditional teachings and cultures. And I believe that it's finding a way to balance that back and forth, to walk in these two worlds is a task that so many of us are on today. trying to integrate and take and not lose, or even regain and rebuild some of those things. So to me, it's a constant balancing act that I believe to me is going to be just lifelong as we journey on. And then over, you'll see the marginal, where these are our Native people who just do not feel like they're fitting into any of the categories. And when I talk about mental illness, when we talk about loneliness, depression, isolation, I tend to think that this may be a group that really would struggle with issues like this. And I do think it gives us empathy if individuals who are maybe struggling with substance abuse issues, or things that are really could probably be more of a core of not feeling like they belong in either society, and so often really struggling. So these are some of the things I want you to think about while you're listening to this, and how people that you work with, or yourself, like where are you at in this journey, and how does that affect how you interpret loneliness and isolation in your life. And then so today we're going to be looking at the westernized model of what loneliness is. And what I tried to do is bring in the Anishinaabe healing that I learned, and it's from my reservation, my culture, and from the gifts that I've been given and continue to work on. So I think that you can look at the gifts of your culture and your community and kind of insert that as well into this middle part, because I believe the way that we're looking at things can always be individualized to whatever you need. But this is one perspective that I found many people can relate to and can feel some connection to this. And then at the end, to kind of enlighten and hopefully get people thinking about how do we start to recover from some of the isolation and the healing work of loneliness in our Native communities. So if you have a piece of paper next to you, I just want you to write down your definition. You're hearing the word loneliness. And I'm just curious, what is that to you? I always feel it's important to not tell somebody what something is. It's probably one of the worst errors you can make, is assume you know the way somebody is feeling. And if you're able, if you have and you want to share what you think that is, I think I can see some of the comments, or they could be shared with us as a group. Beautiful. So somebody said that loneliness is not having an inability to stand others, or no, not being understood by others. There you go. Beautiful. Missing somebody, a lack of connection.
Someone says it was a direct message. So loneliness, not being able to or feeling uncomfortable to reach out to others.
There you go. Beautiful. And it's not being able to, or feeling like you can't reach out to others. No support, no one you trust. I like that word in there, trust, because that's something that I think we're going to be definitely hitting on today. Another person being physically far from others. And then feeling like you're living or doing things without the support of others, even when they are around you. And of feeling like possibly you don't belong. Beautiful. I asked this of my children last night, my son who's in middle school, and he said loneliness is he said it feels like when you're stuck in your head, when you're alone in your head. And I just looked at him, I thought, oh, that's so insightful. And he said, and you have all these thoughts and just nobody you're just stuck with your thoughts. So I just thought for a young boy to be able to communicate that, I thought, geez, you nailed that. I think that's loneliness to him. And others are feeling like they're not belonging to a group. And some have shared, like they said, they could be surrounded by a group and still feel a longing or like they're not being understood. And then others are taking kind of a worldview and saying, you feel alone because the whole world feels pretty cold and isolating. So those are all interesting aspects. And I think that there's no one definition for that word loneliness. And I was even looking in the Ojibwe language, and I don't know how they would describe it. They had words such as she or he is alone. Yet that emotion of the loneliness feeling, being separated from group or clan or tribe. So I think those are all things that could be somewhat healing for us, is that to look inside and say what we can't begin to even repair a feeling like loneliness until we understand what it is to that person. And so what about isolation? I think some of you may have started to start on what's isolation to you? Imposed or self-imposed disconnection from others. Beautiful. Being removed from others emotionally, physically, feeling disconnected, not being able to come and go as you please, or being stuck. Isolation is either purposeful or unpurposeful, removal from others. So when we think about that, unpurposeful from purposeful, removal from others. And then one says it could either be an emotional, physical, mental removal. And then isolation, just a feeling of being misunderstood. Oh, very good point, Linda, who says lack of physical mobility. And so I think that is an important distinction when we think, and I don't know if my slide made it in here because we're, due to time, but of the barriers when we talk about, and for Indigenous people and some people, some of these things, that the feeling of loneliness or an isolation is not a choice. Some people have the barriers in front of them that are really impeding on maybe their spiritual, their mental, or their physical desire to engage. So I think those are all, and Miigwech, thank you so much for sharing those. Every time we do anything today, kind of always think back to, how does this relate to me? Because there are so many that are part of this conference. And I would love to be in a training live with you all to be able to see and to have that energy back and forth. But I can already feel it coming in just by the comments. So always think about, when I'm talking, how does this relate to your life? And something very interesting, and you can even check this out on Netflix or YouTube. I watched a video on loneliness last night, and US is the loneliest nation. That's current data on the research. Within the past years, they're showing high concern, not only in Indian country, but across our nation, that people are feeling so disconnected. Even with all the advancements in technology and trying to make connection easier, people are reporting that they just don't have that, especially in terms of, like, if they were in a crisis. And I'm going to ask you guys the same question. If you were in a crisis, who would you call? And write that person's name down. And if it's 10 people, go ahead and keep writing throughout the day. I'm so glad if you have 10 people you can call. But this was a question posed by a researcher to different people around the nation. And if you're pausing and you're writing, who would you call in a crisis that would respond? This is a reliable person in your life. And what this individual found was that the majority of that, over half of them, said nobody. So if you took a moment and you have grabbed a pen and you wrote down a name, consider yourself very fortunate to have somebody to count on in a time of great need. And the other research is showing that medical doctors are when they deliver news that could be really hard to handle, they've asked who would you like to call? Who would you like us to include in your plan? And again, people are saying there's nobody. And there's no follow-up data, but it's making me wonder, is this true? Are there people who literally have nobody that they can count on in their lives for these big moments? And I think because I'm part of a tribe and because I live on the reservation, I guess I don't know if I would ever say nobody, but I'm fortunate to have that identity. I'm fortunate to have that connection. So if anybody even wants to put ideas out there, because do you think this is a real phenomenon, or is it more about what some people brought up as trust? Being misunderstood by others, being maybe let down by a cold, maybe even selfish worldview right now. And this is the data I don't have. I wasn't able to go and ask those participants, like, is it that you don't have or you don't trust? Or another person who said, I don't feel like I can call out to others. I don't feel like that, which is that's a perception that we have. Okay, and then somebody replied that about 50% of the patients, and I'm not sure where this clinic is, or if it's primarily Native, but it says 50% of the clientele do not document who they would call in an emergency. And I run a clinic here too, and that's one thing that we're trying to do, more of understanding of why is that. And that is one of my theories of trust. When you're, I don't know if they actually physically don't have somebody, or if it's a trust of allowing somebody into your innermost personal parts of your life. Anyways, I do believe this is a big area for Indian country, because that's where the importance of tribe and community, these needs, addressing them, but first understanding them before going to any type of intervention of let's fix this right away. Okay, US practice is not to generational homes. If there were more of them, okay, generational homes, kind of living communities, right? And generational belonging, instead of, we're living in a world that's pretty much, after a certain point, you're almost pushed out of society or hidden from society. And so when you're aging and in need, some people are reporting feeling like a burden if they're having problems. People are really struggling with individuals who aren't feeling well or who need help right now. So our society is in the opposite of what is actually needed for our aging population. Thank you for sharing. The next thing I want you to think about is this statement that we're built to interact with others. Every sense of our being, our brain, all of our five senses, everything, our skin, our bones, our muscles, everything is built to interact with other human beings. And that's part of our basic survival instinct. And so historically, even to survive, what did humans have to do? They had to gather, they had to unite, they had to come together and protect one another for survival. And so when we think about natives and when you think of your own personal struggles with feeling alone, feeling isolated or misunderstood, longing for some sense of belonging and interaction that is meaningful, think about the amount of trauma and unhealed longing that each one of us as Native people carry. And whether you some people choose to feel like they want to move on from this, and others feel like they're still stuck in a lot of this, and we're in this weird middle ground. And that's why I put all those lines of how do we make sense of such a hurt that has never really fully been acknowledged, recognized, or had any empathy for the impact that it has had on a race of people. And that individually means each one of us who are impacted by this, this is our struggle, and we have a right to own it, to acknowledge it, to put it as part of us figuring out how to live well in this society. And looking at instinctively, our tribe equals our survival. And that's for every human being. And so when they separated tribes from their land, their people, they severed survival. And so now we're looking at how do we acknowledge and heal from a loneliness and a longing for something that has not been fully acknowledged. And this is the path that I think many people are walking. And so when we think about the aging population, and it's just the knowledge is, as we age more and more, our networks get smaller. And I know it's been a very tough year for people. I think with COVID and with the loss of life in our tribal communities and non-tribal communities, there are all these impacts that start to put us all in a state of transition. And then so when you're older, the transition, many start to live alone, losing their family and friends. Somebody talked about, not being physically able to go somewhere or interact. And I was glad they put this on there as hearing loss. I've never thought about, you can have this loss of a way to interact with people, even though you're physically present, and feel isolated and lonely because of a certain impairment in your ability to fully connect. And so I think that list could probably go on and on if people provided more of their own examples. Getting sick, and then social media. Right now, there's like this thing with social media where it's enhanced this ability to connect, but it's also disengaged, like pulled so many people from the form of physical, mental interaction. And then there's a form of just withdrawal, where that is where people kind of just start pushing and removing themselves from others because the weight of being around people sometimes is too heavy. So in the US, up to about 43% of our older adults report that they feel lonely, that they're struggling from this. And then, yes, everything that contributes to this feeling of isolation, inability to move, being confined to a space. Somebody said feeling stuck, and stuck could be physically stuck, mentally stuck, emotionally stuck, and spiritually stuck. So I pull out this image when I do grief, and this isn't a training just on griefs, but you cannot talk about loneliness without looking at the weight of grief. And so many people, again, have difficulty describing the feeling of when they lose somebody important to them. And so I think this artist has done an amazing job of what it may feel like to lose somebody close to you. So I brought up COVID a bit, and I made this sign for my parents, because one thing I know about our Native communities, we really struggle with setting a boundary, because we're a collective, we're family, everybody's family, we're all related. And so during COVID, it was taking the way, as tribal members, we were raised what we were taught and doing the exact opposite. You know, don't open your door, close your door. Don't give hugs, stand back. Don't communicate, you know, don't look at each other, don't get too close. And this really has been a struggle for our people, and especially in the terms of grief and loss. You've taken a community that I think comes together in times of crisis and need, and that wasn't unable to happen anymore. So some people that I've worked with have lost, you know, double digits of close family and friends to a unit. And what does that do to a tribe who usually can come together and physically hug, wrap each other in blankets, bring food, you know, even like just to physically be present and get that healing energy, and to be unable to do that for a year. And so on the opposite end, to tell our people that you matter. We want you to be safe, to tell our elders, you're the most important group. We need you to close your doors. And so this was something that I tried to share to help our elders set those boundaries, because this was the group at most risk. And for society, these are our knowledge keepers. These are our people who keep our traditions alive. So COVID is a real threat to Native tradition, to our stories, and to our way of life. So something for us to think about in terms of the loneliness they felt, and how we'll always acknowledge this piece of our history because it's been so impactful, the importance of human connection. And there is a picture of two of our elders sharing down at the art space here in Belcourt. There's two other forms of loss when I do trainings on grief. There's ambiguous and disenfranchised grief. And these are the levels of grief that could be traumatic or just misplaced in terms of society acknowledging and saying, oh, that's a loss. You should be in mourning. You have a right. That fits our category of loss. So ambiguous or disenfranchised loss is grieving that isn't acknowledged.
8:30.
It's having that physical separation and longing and losing some piece of yourself, but not being acknowledged by society as something that should be grieved or allowed to grieve. So I think our Native people struggle with this often. And I talked about it even in the beginning of how do we grieve when certain things have not been acknowledged, that we don't, that doesn't fit a category of grief. And so now these are classes that I believe that we really have to learn more about in order to start to heal from any kind of loneliness. Even in the Ojibwe language, there's no word for goodbye. It's always, I will see you later. So thinking about different ways traditionally that we interpret and think about our life cycle. And so when we talk about repairing from a feeling like loneliness, some people said, I feel like, I don't know if they said separated or stuck in unconnected. Somebody said the word unconnected, like a feeling of not being connected. And so this is an image that I use to look at, trauma and what's lost when a hurt comes into your life. So for a second, if you just have, if you have a piece of paper next to you, just draw out something that would be your ideal of growth, a healthy attachment to people, without a trauma, without something that is breaking you. And so I chose to draw a tree. And at the center of everything, psychologically, spiritually, is our attachment to other people. Even though society seems really it's kind of like everybody out for themselves, achieve, succeed, do this. In reality, it's all about how much can we take ourselves and connect with others into being a full, functioning human being. And when we notice, I mean, this is people who are saying, I want to connect. I don't know how. I feel separated. I can't think right now. I feel broken. I feel unsafe. I'm having trouble trusting this person or this organization. So you can see that when we have those feelings, they're due to some hurts in our lives that have separated or severed our connection. So you can see when your basic needs are met in a relationship or a work environment or a community, wherever you're at, you'll feel the flourish. You'll feel the stability of like the trunk of that tree. And so it's working through, and there's always time to repair these hurts. There's always time. So this separation. Does anybody have some share, like if this was their interpretation of what could they grow into if all their needs were met in a good way? When I do this in trainings, sometimes people are kind of stuck. They can't think of, some will recreate a tree, and that's fine. But when I really challenge people to think about themselves, not my trauma or my hurt or how I grow, really identify with them and what to them looks like healthy growth for their life. Beautiful, climbing a mountain, but with trauma, having a huge weight down, backpack, trying to climb the mountain. So one side, a beautiful mountain, and you're climbing it without any weight, feeling the freedom of your body, the ability of I can do this. That also doesn't mean it's easy, does it? Even though we feel good, growth is not easy. Repairing is not easy. She's still climbing that mountain, which is not easy, but she's letting go of that backpack that is pulling her down. And no interconnectedness. Somebody drew a musical note with some Spanish words, and in hopes that she's learning the language and to play an instrument. Wow. Okay, so, and this could be where we're saying, I'm not that tree, I'm not that, yet I see this in me. I see this as me starting to heal. I see a Spanish, a music note. I see Spanish. I see an instrument, and I see me playing those. And that's me piecing together a lot of my hurts and injuries from my past. So many of us may not be fully here, but the goal is to imagine how that would look. And then in a creative way to get your brain to say, what's my symbol for that? How can I explain this to others without using words? And that's the beautiful thing about art. Their brain will work in so many different ways when thinking about loneliness, isolation, and trauma and hurt. And then to get the right and the left brain going between that verbal and that artistic, intuitive piece, you can start to feel a healing energy that a lot of times in society we block out. Somebody said sloshing through mud and then looking for a firm ground to stand on. And then another is thinking of roads coming in and with exits, okay, but then being stuck and the exits and inclement roads are blocked off. Beautiful. There we go. So, yes. And then somebody said the feeling of rest needed after a trauma. I felt rest and sleep in a sheltered area with love and comfort was always there. So looking at the importance of, I think that's exactly right, to look at the importance of the time it takes to recover from a trauma. And I always think about loss and grief, and I ask people, like, how many days do you get off of work to grieve? Some people get 2 or 3 days off. Some people may take a week. I've hardly, heard of others just saying I know they need, but being accepted to have more time to repair. So then you all were able to look at this correctly in terms of like an isolation. And there are some standards to think if somebody is like socially isolated, it's living alone and then having less than monthly contact with somebody and then not belonging to a group. So there are ways to reach out to people and ask, if they're living alone, and then you have 2 more questions to ask them to see if this is something that they're struggling with. And then what would the other question have to be? Do they feel isolated? Okay, so somebody can, like you've all said, some of you feel like you remove and you're not isolated, but you need a break from certain things. So it's always looking at who feels socially isolated, who's unhappy with this situation. Even though we all think we require these things, we have to respect our elders who do not feel that this is a struggle for them socially, mentally, or physically. And then the feeling of being alone and lonely, a longing for somebody. So when I think about trying to look at repairing and offering some hope for loneliness, because it's a tough thing that we all face, and how much of it should we have to face when it's prolonged and it's people are asking for something better. So I think of this in terms of our medicine wheel and look at about balancing, because if there's one area that's off, it's going to impact the entire structure of ourselves. And so this is something where people can start to look at how a feeling like loneliness or being socially isolated will impact every other part of our being. So it's not, the fix is not simple. You can't just call somebody up and say, okay, now you don't have to be lonely anymore. We're going to put you in, you're going to have you do this. We're going to have this be done, because it's then balancing other areas of their life where the loneliness has impacted. So one thing, the mentality, our mind state, which is part of our entire system, loneliness has been shown to impact decision-making and problem solving. It's actually getting into that frontal lobe right here. I always think of people when they feel stressed or overwhelmed, or they'll just physically like grab the top of their head. And this is the area of the brain that's our personality, our ability to make good sound judgment, to be real consistent with the kind of person that we've developed into. And so with extreme loneliness, people can start to have trouble with that and making any decisions for the future. Their learning and memory can be impaired. So if loneliness or isolation is chronic, the brain starts to feel that. It's just like working out anything. If you don't work something and utilize something, it starts to feel like it's not functioning in the way it should. And the amygdala, it's the part of our brain that allows us to feel that emotion and interpret it and express it. And so the emotion part of the brain starts to also feel impaired. Because we're social beings, we need this. We think about touch, just that physical touch, and what happens to our brain and our body when we have that physical touch from another human being. Our body will actually release oxytocin, I believe it's called, which is like a well-being hormone. It's getting that chemical and that hormone in your body through that physical touch. So a sense of calm and well-being, if the physical touch, of course, is done in a way that is appropriate and you consider it as something that you're wanting or needing. And so the impact of a hug from another person, or the impact of a hug from a family member or somebody that you love, can really get your body producing this hormone. And so without it, there are ways that we actually encourage people to try to create on their own, because it's something that, like I said, even if you choose to not be a physical person, your body still needs those hormones. It was built that way. So a lot of people, even right now, if you each take your hand, put one out, put the other out like this, your right and your left, okay? And then wrap this one over this way. There you go. This one, okay, big hug, squeeze that out. Ooh, come on. Okay. Even giving yourself a little bit of a neck rub there. Okay. That, okay, right there, that just stimulated. How many people just feel a little bit better after doing that? Yes, okay, good. So those are some things when you're working with yourself, doing that for yourself and knowing this is part of you taking care of that physical piece of who you are. And so taking care of that physical will also start to stimulate that mind. The other one is the emotional, where there's an increase today for depression and anxiety. And there are two factors, it could be genetic, related to our makeup or a chemical imbalance in our brain. But most of the other factors are lifestyle. So 7 other things that contribute to these depression and anxiety that could come from loneliness comes down to choices that we can make behaviorally to make change. So I think that's a pretty good odds that we can start to build behavior to start to change the depression and anxiety and the angst that the lack in the other areas can cause. And here is the last one. The most, to me, the most important thing that's left out of most healing models is a spiritual component. Having a sense of purpose and spirit and path is an essential piece of the tribal model of looking at being your complete self, is having an understanding and insight, a level of calm and peace that can only come from having a spiritual enlightened acknowledgement within your body and soul. And so over on the side, you can see that the goal of life is connectedness. And these are two things, isolation and the loneliness, that can really make us feel unconnected. And so if that's the one thing in life we're striving towards in Indian country, then it's looking at treating the person from all these levels and understanding how we start to go on from there. In the center of that medicine wheel is self, and it's called the seasons of life. So there are 4 seasons, and right now we're looking at, if you take a look at this, you can probably find where you're at in life and try to place, like, there are roles in each one of our seasons, and our elders, knowing what their role is, imagine how healing that could be for them if they didn't know, or if they're missing part of their identity. To know, what are my roles during this stage of my life? What can I be working on? What's next for me? So Miigwech, thank you for listening. I'll just put it here while we ask for any questions. These are some ideas for getting, starting to target each one of those areas of the physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental part of healing from something of a feeling of loneliness, depression, or anxiety, and looking at engagements for our older adults. This is some of the things that was done in the art space here in Belcourt, where we were looking mainly for the intergenerational interaction to stimulate the youth, the elders stimulating the youth, a sense of purpose, storytelling.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Someone just put in the Q&A that they would draw a flower with petals. The new flower growing is me growing, and the old fallen petals are the past traumas dropping away. With new petals, new growth.
That is so beautiful. And it brings it back to the piece of this slide here is offering some kind of healing things. And there's research that connecting, which Indigenous, we know this, connecting to the ground, to Mother Earth and to soil, getting in and using the land, gardening, planting flowers, just being outside among the elements can be very healing for this. So that's a great message and great image.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Miigwech for listening. I appreciate it. And I just want to leave you with thinking about your own gifts, your to balance. What do you have to help yourself stay connected when we think of all of our gifts, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual? And then to ask those of who you work with to offer some kind of help and insight in this area for our elders. So Chi Miigwech, thank you very much for listening.